Welcome to The Virtual Shift, a show looking at the seismic changes happening in healthcare with virtual care at the epicenter. Join me and my guests as we look at key cultural and policy shifts impacting how providers, payers, and patients connect, as well as how care is being reimagined both for today and the future. Hello, and thanks for tuning in today. I'm your host, Tom Foley. You can learn more about this show by visiting the program on healthcarenowradio.com, and be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter at FoleyTom, and the hashtag The Virtual Shift. Today we have a great guest on, Paddy. He is the founder and CEO of Damo Consulting. Paddy, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here.
Awesome. So, Paddy, you bring a different perspective to the market. You're not delivering care, if you will. You're really a strategist that engages health systems and providers in, their best path forward on how to reimagine the delivery of care. Is that a fair position of your expertise?
Sure. Yep.
So you talk across the industry, which I think the audience is going to be very interested to hear what you have to say. We've all been challenged with the pandemic, but at the same time, we're all trying to reimagine the delivery of care from, the classic statement of episodic to value-based care. And that's a huge shift in and of itself, because not all health systems and or providers are financially positioned to make that shift. So taking on risk in a true value-based care model is the challenge. And as part of today's discussion, we'll explore, is there a middle ground that we have to get to first before we get to value-based care? So tell us a little bit about yourself and Damo Consulting and how you engage the market.
Sure, happy to do that, Tom. Just briefly, the arc of my career in healthcare has been that over the last 20 years or so, I've been in healthcare tech. I've been in a couple of analytics startups. Prior to that, my last corporate job was with one of the big four consulting firms, where I did a lot of work with health systems, in particular health plans. And over the last several years, I've been running my own digital transformation advisory firm, Damo Consulting, that works exclusively in healthcare, and almost all of our work is with health systems. So we help health systems with their digital strategy, their digital roadmaps, with their technology strategy, their technology partner selection, digital governance, operations, things like that. And along the way, I wrote two books. The first one was called The Big Unlock, which actually came out of my experience as a part of the founding team of two startups that were in the healthcare analytics space that eventually went through exits. And the more recent one was published in late 2020. It's called Healthcare Digital Transformation: How Consumerism, Technology, and Pandemic Are Accelerating the Future. I co-authored that with Ed Marks, who was a CIO of Cleveland Clinic, where we did a lot of work related to the digital transformation strategy for the clinic. And we took that experience and we rounded it out with a bunch of different interviews and put it all together and put it out in the form of a book. Among other things, like yourself, I'm a podcaster as well. I host my own podcast, The Big Unlock, where I get to, I get the great fortune of interviewing chief digital officers, CIOs, technology innovators, digital health innovators. And there's just a wealth of experience and a richness of experience that I'm able to share with the audience.
Awesome. So the question here ultimately is, how do we get to value? So tell us a little bit about some of the insights you talk about in your latest book on that digital transformation.
Yeah, the subtitle to the book is How Consumerism, Technology, and Pandemic Are Accelerating the Future. The choice of the word consumerism is not accidental. It was very deliberately chosen because we knew that healthcare was becoming more and more of a consumer-oriented industry. Healthcare consumers are beginning to seek change. They're seeking options. They're seeking something different from the business as usual that healthcare was used to. And technology is the enabler for that consumerism, the vision of consumerism to come true. If we are to become an Amazon, an Apple, or any of those consumer-focused, successful companies, if healthcare has to become one of those, And you have to really focus on the needs of the consumer and build backwards from that. We've been the other way around. And the pandemic, because the pandemic has created a forcing function for the entire healthcare industry to change. And we saw how change happened overnight when telehealth became the norm as opposed to the exception. And prior to the pandemic, less than 10% of all ambulatory care visits were addressed by some kind of a telehealth slash e-visit slash virtual care modality. Pandemic came along and it went, overnight. Most of the visits were being done through some kind of a virtual modality. Now the volumes have leveled off a little bit, but it's still significantly higher. And it's safe to say that telehealth is now mainstream. Now that is one of the results of the forcing function. But we're still not quite at a place where we can call ourselves truly consumer focused and consumer oriented. As an industry, healthcare is still very inside looking out. And what's going to change that is competitive forces on top of consumerization. And we'll talk more about that, but those are the themes that I think are going to be playing out as we speak.
And what are some of the interim challenges? I totally agree with what you just stated, but this pandemic has introduced an additional challenge, right? It's not just about adopting technology and ensuring that your patients have access to the technology as well as access to care, but the shortage in clinical resources to provide that service is, again, I think, a challenge. I've always said on the show, I've been saying it back when I, in a different capacity, used to say, the macro trends is we have a growing population, an aging population, and a sicker population contracting more or developing more and more chronic conditions. At the same time, we have less doctors and nurses. That was back in 2015 I started saying that. Right now, I think you were in an offline conversation. You were talking about resource shortages just because of the pandemic and not taking the vaccines and how that's further impacting that equation. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I read a report recently from the American College of Healthcare Executives, which said that the number one priority for healthcare CEOs today is a shortage of workers at all levels. Now, if you peel it back a little bit, right? You've got to, we all know that there's an acute shortage of primary care physicians across the country. That shortage isn't going away anytime soon. We've got another report that I read, which was, I think, by Mercer Consulting, which said we've got 10 million workers who work in frontline occupations, nurse assistants, home health assistants, those kinds of roles. And about 6 million of them are set to permanently exit from the workforce in the next 5 years or so. Those exits could be either voluntary because they're no longer interested in working in healthcare, or they're retiring, or whatever the case may be. But the scary part is that it is expected that only about a third of those jobs, namely about 2 million workers, will backfill the 6 million that are going away. So we're going to be left with a gap of 4 million workers. This is just the macro picture. And if you look at where we are heading as a healthcare economy, this is not sustainable. Now, you bring it down even further into the technology. So you could say, oh, we'll throw technology at it and, we'll automate the heck out of everything. And, we can make up for the gap. Well, firstly, you can't automate everything. Humans touching humans cannot be automated. You're going to still need humans. But yes, some parts of those kinds of work can be automated. The other part of it is, how do you, even to throw technology at the problem, you have to build the technology. There's an acute shortage of technology workers today. The Wall Street Journal reported that there's 320,000 open jobs, IT jobs. It's just by scraping the websites of all of the companies out there that have posted jobs, you come up with a number like that. The real number may be much higher. And anywhere you go today, this is the next big forcing function, Tom. We had the pandemic, which was a forcing function exactly 2 years ago. Now, the next big forcing function is the shortage of workers. Whether the pandemic caused it, I don't know. But the fact is we're in the middle of it right now. Yeah. And so this is like a perfect storm of forces, which is going to somehow force healthcare to change. Your conventional, traditional ways of serving your patients and consumers, using your conventional models of brick and mortar facilities and large numbers of people, all that has got to change. There's got to be a paradigm shift.
I agree, and I appreciate your position on consumerism. And in that context, I think that, in order for a project, if you will, an initiative to be successful, you have to have alignment from top to bottom. And in this case, it's alignment between physician and patient. And I think that to some degree, health systems are focused on how to get the value, which I get it. And, because Medicare and Medicaid are pushing them to, risk-oriented contracts and things of that nature. However, there are other challenges in the middle here. And health the providers aren't necessarily positioned to take on that risk, because that whole swing in the financial model is very impactful, right? Health systems used to count, one of their KPIs was utilization of beds. And in a value-based world, there are no beds, hypothetically, blowing it out of proportion. But, so there's a whole different paradigm shift in how we think about the delivery of care. So I step back and I say, listen, just a shortage of resources and the growing need for clinical services creates the need for us to reimagine the delivery of care. Put value-based care aside for a second, and let's align on the continuum of how we get there. So I talk often about continuous care, right? It's not about episodic and it's not about value-based. It's how do we at least get to the ability to extend clinical services from the office into the home. And we can do that through telehealth. And it doesn't always have to be the doctor that's on the call, right? So we have telehealth, remote patient monitoring, remote therapeutic monitoring, chronic care management. Those are all part of a virtual program to some degree. And so that home now becomes the setting of care. And then we can talk about hospital at home as well. But the point there being is there's a significant amount of revenue that doctors can take on, and by enhancing their service, extending care into the home, and leveraging these programs and driving different types of revenue, and ultimately without even taking on any risk. And the beauty of it, in my view, is that if you have a patient engaged in those virtual programs, they're likely to be on their path to wellness more so than if they were involved in an episodic care model, right? The Medicare patient, 5 chronic conditions, sees 9 different doctors, spends 15 hours in front of their doctor in a given year. The biggest question on how do we get to value and how a patient gets to wellness is what happens at other 8,745 hours. Thoughts on that?
So I think the operative word in your comments there, Tom, is reimagine. We have to reimagine healthcare. Reimagining healthcare isn't simply a matter of throwing technology or some virtual care modality model. Reimagining means starting with what the consumer needs and what the consumer's pain points are, just like in any other industry. And this is why some of the big tech firms are, they're approaching it in a very different way. We'll come to that in a minute. But reimagining means starting with the consumer and what he or she needs. Reimagining means looking beyond just slapping technology on an existing paradigm. So let me give you an example. Last year, for the first time, I started doing televisits. My first ever televisit was last year sometime. And I can tell you this, I was underwhelmed by the experience. Why was I underwhelmed? Because it felt very much like a visit to a brick and mortar facility. And let me explain that. I get on the call, doctor is not there. She's not on time. Now I'm waiting there for 15 minutes doing my wordle of the day or whatever it is that, people do when they have a few minutes on their hands. And so it felt very, very brick and mortar like. I'm waiting. There's nothing to tell me that the doctor is running late. There is no message to tell me how long he or she is going to be before coming on. And then you layer on the other thing. The doctor comes on. They haven't seen my charts. They're pulling it up as we speak. And then while we are speaking, the doctor's looking at the charts. So all the stuff that you don't like about an in-person experience, you're welcome. You can experience it in a telehealth visit as well. What has it done?
Hey, consistency is good. Consistency. No, I'm joking. Go ahead.
Well, you can declare victory on that. Yeah, it's consistent. But the point I'm making is, again, I don't want to say that all telehealth visits are bad. I don't want to say that telehealth is not good. But the point about reimagining is that you have to think about the consumer's experience from the consumer's point of view.
Yeah.
If you have a suboptimal experience, like making the consumer wait for 15 minutes without even a message, that's not a good consumer experience. Or if you have a digital experience which involves multiple technologies that don't really, operate seamlessly, and you're being, flipped from one site to another. You go on one site for the scheduling, another site for the payment, and third site for, registration, filling on formalities, forms. If you're going to have a suboptimal and broken experience, again, you're going to let the consumer down, right?
We saw this problem when we migrated to electronic medical records. We tried to just we just slapped technology in there. As you know, back then 50% of all EHR deployments failed. But the point is that we didn't do a good job in marrying and enhancing the process. We tried to marry it, right? Don't disrupt the apple cart. But to your point, there's a different, there should be some level of expectations. I know at GenieMD, there's a different way of engaging the patient. Maybe having them take their vitals, maybe having them take their EKG with their AliveCore device, or anything else. But all that is actually gathered as part of the clinical record before the doctor even gets on. So, and we also encourage the doctor to look at the patient record before they get on, so they can just jump right into it, if you will, right?
I will not, even though my telehealth visit was underwhelming, I still loved it because it allowed me to do it from home. So I don't want to take away from that fact, right? But I'll come back to this. Go ahead. You were saying something.
That's a fair point. So I was going to get into the consumerization of it. We have organizations like Amazon coming into healthcare, right? And so often people say, well, they have no healthcare experience. What business do they have being in healthcare? But what they have, and to some degree, is like a third world country, as we talked offline, a third world country, wanting to put a telephone system in. So do they run wires or do they just go wireless, right? Where Amazon doesn't have the legacy baggage, if you will, and can jump right in and reimagine the delivery of care. Thoughts on that?
I think, in a very strange way, I think Amazon's lack of experience in the healthcare business may well be their biggest advantage, because they're not burdened by the conventional notion of how healthcare should be delivered, how the healthcare experience should be designed. They're not burdened by the physics of healthcare, as I like to call it. The big investments you've made in hospital facilities and clinics and these large workforces that, it's all about fee for service at the end of the day, which is why, Tom, to your earlier comment, when we talk about value-based care and capitated models and risk bearing and risk sharing and all of that, it all arises from the fundamental notion of having this huge estate and a stranded investment in all of these physical facilities and so on. And how do you manage the risks of maybe potential loss of revenue here or there with some potential gains through, value-based care, which is why I think we're not getting it. So of course, in the middle of all of this is the whole incentive model. To your point, how are doctors and physicians and clinicians incented for the work that they do? If it's based on utilization, then you're going to be driving their behaviors towards, meeting whatever it is that the organization incents them to meet. The Amazons of the world don't have to deal with all of that. Now, you could say that, look, if you ignore all of that, you're doing that at your peril, because you're going to bump into a wall at some point in time. Maybe they will. And, Amazon's had its failures too. So it's, the jury is still out on whether they're going to make it or not. But the one thing they do have is they don't have the baggage of having worked for a very long time in a conventional, traditional healthcare delivery model. In fact, to the contrary, they're coming into healthcare with deep knowledge and experience in consumer-oriented businesses. So it goes back to what I said in the beginning. If healthcare is going to get consumerized and we're going to be a consumer-focused and consumer-oriented sector, we have to adopt the best practices of the sectors that are already delivering best-in-class experiences to consumers and have set the bar. Apple, Amazon, Google, name any number of, personal finance, banking, securities, your stockbroker, they all deliver much, much better experiences online than healthcare does today. So the bar has already been set for healthcare. If any one of those players decides to get into healthcare, they will bring all of those experiences and reset the bar for you, whether you like it or not. So if you're a healthcare enterprise, you're going to have to be thinking about moving up in the consumer experience scale while managing all of the other, call it the physics of it, call it the economics of it, the fee for service, the value-based care models. the risk bearing, and all of that good stuff.
And to that end, when we talk about consumerism, Amazon potentially, using them purely as an example here, is going to come at it as Steve Jobs came at the iPhone, right? The consumer didn't know what they wanted until they saw it. So we're so used to healthcare, paying insurance, paying the deductibles, all that good stuff, right? It's a very heavy lift and, quite frankly, to some degree, an inhibitor to care in and of itself, in my opinion. But that said, Amazon, to your point, comes at it and says, hey, I think delivery of care could be or look like this. And the consumers, I think, are going to jump on it because at the end of the day, the legacy systems seem to be burdened by the past and at the same time burdened by what regulatory is saying, right? Value-based care. I talk about value-based care almost at every holiday sit down at the dinner table, right? And consumers, they don't know what the heck that is.
Don't care.
Right? And they don't care. So you can now, one thing that I think we can all agree on is that we can all do a better job in our diet. We can all do a better job in our exercising. When we have 6 out of 10 adults with a chronic condition, so we can all do a better job in what we consume. And as Gal said in a previous conference that I was in, she comes from Japan, and they talk about food as being medicine. And so what we consume is who we become to some degree. And so we can do that. That's a mindset in and of itself. That's a behavioral change. That's a reimagining life, if you will, to some degree for some of us. But the point there being is that until the consumer realizes that they have a responsibility towards value, I think that we're just going to continue to miss on the alignment curve. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple things that we need to keep in mind, right? So there is the consumer is not happy with the current state of healthcare. It costs too much. You don't get great outcomes. You have to wait for care, and it's not a great experience. Now, interestingly, most of healthcare today, at least in the private sector, is paid for by employers. The employers are also fed up. So employers are beginning to disintermediate the insurance companies and going straight to the providers. Now, in this case, the providers could be someone like an Amazon. So, let's play that out for a second. So Amazon's customers today are not your health system. They're not going to the health systems, obviously, because they're competing with the health systems, nor are they health insurance companies. They're going to employers. They're going to big employers, and they're saying, we will take over primary care responsibility for your entire employee population. Pay us $60 a month. I'm making up that number. I don't know that it's 60. Pay us $60 a month, and that's it. This is the range of services. They will have a clinician on call within 60 seconds of making the call. So no more than a 60-second hold time. And if there's an urgent matter, they will be at an urgent care facility. We'll make sure they get there. Or if they need somebody to check in on them at home, somebody will be there in 24 hours. So you set some service level commitments. You go to an employer with a message like that. Employers are going, it sounds good. It's going to cost less. Amazon is a big company. They will figure this out. They're not going to go away tomorrow. What do I stand to lose? Right? And so what that does is it takes the healthcare market apart. And I like to say that the big competitive battleground today for healthcare is in the primary care space, right? Because your Amazons and your Googles, and they're all coming towards primary care, even a lot of the digital health startups. And then slowly they're chipping away at the edges. Chronic care. How did companies like Livongo or Omada, what are they? They're also going to employ employers. And they're saying, we'll take care of all your diabetics. Hand over all your diabetics to us. We will take care of them. We will reverse their diabetes. We will put them back on the path to health. We will make sure we reduce their hospitalizations or their ER visits by 50%, whatever it is. We'll use data, we'll use analytics. We use lifestyle coaching, to your point, diet and exercise and lifestyle, all of that stuff. So there is a movement underway as we speak when parts of the healthcare system are being disintermediated by the newer players in healthcare. Now, the incumbents are, they still have a strong position with tertiary care and acute care hospitals and so on and so forth. And that's not going to go away anytime soon. But at least now, for some parts of care, you have choice. So the Amazons and all of these, they realize that in playing the game through value-based care, reimbursement, forget all that. Go to the employer and say, $60, we'll take care of it. Now, the next thing you've got Alexa services. You're on Medicare, you're at home. You call Alexa and say, Alexa, I'm having breathlessness or whatever it is. Call my doc. And immediately Alexa calls a doc. So Amazon's also solving for the physics problem, right? By partnering with somebody who's able to bring that capacity.
I will tell you that I was one of the first actually to introduce Alexa at HIMSS in 2016. They were in our booth with the very similar use case. It's come a long way since then, but I won't say that I was the first, but it was interesting that, Alexa being where it was back in 2015 versus where it is now, it certainly has come a long way. So, Paddy, I'm going to have to leave it there. Great conversation. I hope you'll come back and join us sometime soon.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Tom.
Awesome. Thanks again. I would like to thank the show sponsors, both HP and Intel. HP Engage long lifecycle products provide the stability, safety, and security you need, plus flexibility and performance designed for today and tomorrow. As well, Intel would like you to know we're going above and beyond together with new standards for business with the latest Intel vPro processors, delivering what IT needs for performance, security, remote manageability, and stability. And be sure to check out the program page on healthcarenowradio.com. And remember, connect or follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter at FoleyTom, and follow the show's hashtag, The Virtual Shift. I'm Tom Foley. Until the next shift.